Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. I'm currently working as an assistant delivery manager at Threatsys, where I am responsible for overseeing complete end-to-end vulnerability assessment and penetration testing process. Today, we are going to talk about something that might seem deceptively simple at first, but has been behind some of the biggest real-world breaches in recent years. That is SSRF, or server-side request forgery. Now, let me ask you one question. Have you ever thought about what could happen if an attacker could convince your own server to send a request on their behalf? That's exactly the core of SSRF. It's not about directly hacking into your server, but rather tricking your server into becoming the attacker. And believe me, the consequences can be far-reaching far from like internal network scans to accessing cloud metadata or even complete compromise of internal applications that were never meant to face the internet. Let me share my slides with you. During this webinar, I'm going to guide you through what is SSRF and why it's dangerous, how attackers typically exploit it, the latest tools and techniques we use for discovering the testing SSRF vulnerabilities, and most importantly, effective prevention and mitigation strategies to protect your application and infrastructure. We'll also look at how SSRF fits into the broader context of VAPT and why it has become such a critical finding in almost every pen test report today. So without further delay, let's dive into fascinating and something overlooked world of server-side request forgery. Threatsys Technologies Private Limited is a certain associated and ISO 27001 certified cybersecurity company. For the past 12 years, we have been helping both public and private sectors clients protect their critical data and IT systems. We work across many industries, including banking, fintech, healthcare, manufacturing, and more, serving clients in India and around the world. I'll explain in this webinar. I'll explain what server-side request forgery is and how it's work. Understand why this vulnerability is so dangerous and the types of vulnerabilities we have in SSRF, that is direct SSRF and blind SSRF. In direct SSRF, where attacker sees the response, and in blind SSRF, Attacker do not see the response but still know the server made the request. Will understand tools like burp suite, burp collaborator, SSRF map, etc. Then we will discuss how an attacker exploit blind SSRF with shell lock exploitation. Finally, in prevention and mitigation part, we will discuss how to protect applications by strictly validating user inputs and allowing only trusted user URLs. So, what is SSRF? Server-side request forgery is a vulnerability when an attacker tricks the server into making requests to unintended locations, often internal systems that are not directly accessible from outside. See, I'll explain you with this example when an attacker want to access the internal resources but cannot access as do not have the authority. So instead of directly trying to access the internal resources, he requests a web application that have all the authorities to access the internal resources. So the attacker manipulates the server to send HTTP request on their behalf. Normally, the server sends requests to external resources based on user input like URLs. Attackers can abuse this mechanism to make the server communicate with internal services that should not be accessible. Now let's look at the impact of SSRF using CIA triad. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability are affected due to this. First, confidentiality. Attacker Attackers can use SSRF to read sensitive internal data or even steal credentials from services that should be hidden from outside. In integrity, SSRF could allow malicious users to change internal configurations to tamper with private services, potentially leading to bigger security issues. And finally, it's affecting availability, although this isn't usually the main goal of SSRF, but it still can happen. For example, if an attacker sends a repeated complex requests, it should it could overload the server's CPU or memory, slow down performance, or cause potential denial of service attacks. In short, SSRF doesn't just read data, it can also change things or disrupt services if systems aren't properly protected. Why SSRF matters? SSRF may look like it's just about making the server fetch a URL, but it's much more serious. It breaks the trust boundary between what users can control and what server can access inside a private network. This makes SSRF can access internal server that can normally hidden. SSRF can read sensitive through SSRF. We can read sensitive data or cloud metadata like secret keys. We can scan private networks to find other weaknesses. Sometimes even combine it with other vulnerabilities to take full control over systems. Now let me explain you the types of SSRF there. Now let's look at there are two common type of SSRF, that is direct SSRF and blind SSRF. In direct SSRF, the attacker sends a crafted URL to the server and the server fetches the URL. What makes fetches the URL? What makes it direct is that response from the internal system is sent back to the attacker. This makes it easier to test and exploit because the attacker can immediately send data like error messages, internal IPs, or even sensitive file returned in the response. Okay, so I'll guide you through a demo. So now let's see how we can exploit SSRF in a vulnerable application using the file inclusion feature. First, we'll start the dvwa container by running a simple command in the command prompt. This will start the machine in Docker. Sorry for the glitch, everyone. So, we are starting a vulnerable lab through Docker, and we'll use this command to start the lab. So, the lab is running now. What we will do is we'll again run a command to check the application ID, that is, and we'll copy this container ID. This command that I run here, this command downloads and runs dvw and makes it accessible to our local machine at port 8080. And docker.ps command shows the container ID. Now I'm using this command to upload a custom SSRF testing script into the container. The script is ssrf.php, and we copy it to the webroot folder so it can be accessed from the browser. So finally what we will do is we'll load this at our local host. Okay. Now our machine is active now. We'll log in first. And now we will create a database. It will take 2 seconds and we have to log in and again. Due to this file inclusion feature available in this vulnerable application, we were able to inject this script and now we'll check if the vulnerable application have the SSRF vulnerability or not. See, so what happened here is the SSRF script takes the URL parameter from query string. It makes the server itself send a request to http example.com. This shows us How SSRF works. We control where the server makes the request, even to place that should be internal. In real attack, instead of example.com, the attacker could target the internal IPs, cloud metadata endpoints, or sensitive services, which makes SSRF so dangerous. So, this simple demo helps us see why validating input and restricting server request is so important in real applications. So, we'll go to the slides again and we'll discuss about this second type of SSRF, that is blind SSRF. In blind SSRF, the attacker can still make the server send a request, but they do not see the response here. This means the attacker doesn't directly know what happened from the server's reply. To confirm if it worked, attacker uses external tools like burp collaborators to know. Now, these tools watch for DNS and HTTP requests that comes from the target server. If they see the server reaching out, that provides the SSRF exists. Blind SSRF can be harder to exploit because there is no direct feedback, but it can still be very dangerous, especially for scanning internal networks or accessing hidden services. We'll again see a lab. We'll again through a lab we'll understand what is blind SSRF and how we can exploit it. Let me quickly disable the first tab. To understand how SSRF, blind SSRF works and how we can exploit and how we can check what is happening, we'll solve this lab from Rout blind SSRF with Shellshock exploitation. So the lab itself says that the site uses analytics software which fetches the URL specific and the referrer header when the product page is loaded. To solve the lab use this functionality to perform a blind SSRF attack against a internal server in 192.168.0.x range on port 8080. In this blind attack, use a Shellshock payload against the internal server to exfiltrate the name of the OS user. So, so the vulnerable parameter here is referrer header, and to solve the lab, we have to use this functionality to perform a blind SSRF attack in the internal server ranges from 192.168.0.x as given in port 8080. We'll have to check. Okay. Here we will be using this extension collaborator everywhere to check that it's actually vulnerable to blind SSRF. So what we'll do is access this lab. We'll remove show only in scope items, apply close. We'll check for this target URL, that is this one, 880, this one. We'll send this target, we'll add this to scope. Yes. Re-enable sitemap, show only in scope items, apply and close. Okay, so the above is now ready to fetch the informations. We'll visit this view details and we'll see okay. Again. Okay, so here we can see through collaborator everywhere that we are getting a pingback request to referrer and user agent. Doing blind SSRF in order to perform a Shellshock exploitation in the user agent. Shellshock is a vulnerability that allows you to get RCE. The reason it allows that because of improper input validation. We are going to do this by adding Shellshock payload to the user agent. So what we will do is we'll go to proxy, then HTTP history, and this request is vulnerable to SSRF. We'll send this request to repeater. Okay. As it states that we'll change this and give a Shellshock payload in order to perform the attack. So I have already crafted the Shellshock payload. I'll simply insert it here, and what we need is the collaborator domain. Okay, so again go to repeater and we'll insert it here, and in the referrer we will change it to the given target. That was this internal server range, that is 192.168.0.x. Change it to 1. So what it's going to do is, if the server exists and running on port 8080 and is vulnerable to Shellshock vulnerability, the user agent will perform a NS lookup on the server, and we will get the OS username to solve the lab. Okay. I will send the request. And we'll go to collaborator and we'll click on poll now. So nothing is coming up. That means there is no active server in S.1. So what we will do is we'll check the entire range from 1 to 255. We'll send the request to repeater. Then we'll add the position here, change the payload type from simple list to numbers. We'll give the range from 1 to 255. Okay. And step 1, it will proceed sequentially, and we'll click on start attack. Let me check the payload. Okay. The attack is finished. We'll again go to collaborator and click on poll now. Oh, it's taking some time. Okay. So as this particular lab is vulnerable to Shellshock exploitation, we will be getting this in the collaborator with the username that is required to solve the lab. We'll copy this username and submit the solution here. So the lab is solved now. Now we'll talk about some tools that we use for during SSRF pen testing. Test and find SSRF vulnerabilities. Security professional use several specialized tools. Now let's talk about some tools we commonly use to find SSRF vulnerabilities. First is Bug Suit. This is the most popular tool for web application testing. It helps us intercept and modify requests, and with Bug Collaborator feature, we can detect blind SSRF by checking if the server makes outbound DNS or HTTP request. Second is SSRF map. This tool automates the process of scanning and fuzzing for SSRF. Gophers is the third tool that creates payload using the Gopher protocol. This can be useful when trying to bypass filters or exploit SSRF to access internal services. We use Nuclei for a fast and customizable vulnerability scanner. It uses templates to scan for known SSRF patterns across multiple endpoints. And finally, Interact SH. This tool helps detect blind SSRF. It creates unique payloads and wait for the servers to make the request back. Together, these tools help the security testers and researchers discover SSRF in different ways. Now, let's look at how we can design and code application to prevent SSRF vulnerabilities from happening in the first place. First, always whitelist trusted URLs and IP ranges. Instead of letting the application connect anywhere, only allow connection to specific approved domains or IP addresses. Next is we should block local host and internal ranges to prevent attackers from targeting private services inside your network. Also, make sure to validate and sanitize user input strictly. Never pass raw URLs from user input directly to backend network. And be careful with your URL parsing. Finally, try to avoid dynamic URL fetching based on user input whenever possible. Even with the best prevention, it's smart to plan for what happens if SSRF still occurs. This defense in depth measure can help reduce the impact. Keep sensitive systems and services on separate networks that can be directly reached from application servers. Deploy a web application firewall. This can help block unexpected protocols or suspicious URL patterns attacker might use. Limit outbound connections by using egress filterings. Log and monitor all outbound requests. This helps detect unusual and malicious traffics early before it causes bigger problems. And finally, always keep your dependencies and framework updated. By combining this preventive coding practices with layered defenses, we can significantly reduce the risk and impact of SSRF attacks. Any questions? Please type your desired questions in the comment section and we'll answer that. Okay, so here we have one question from Pragyanshu. Can SSRF be performed only on URL endpoints? No, SSRF isn't limited to URL endpoints. It can happen whenever and wherever user input controls, uh, like any part of a server-side request, including JSON fields, headers, file names, or even though protocol abuse, not just direct URLs. For prevention part, we'll have to whitelist trusted URLs and IP ranges like 127.0.0.0/8, yeah, 169.254 to prevent attackers from targeting private services inside your network. We should never pass raw URLs from user input directly to the backend network calls. Thank you so much for attending my. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this webinar. Thanks a lot.
So, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Jagadiswar Majhee and I'm working here at Threatsys Technologies as a project delivery engineer. And I am really excited to be here with you guys for what I think is one of the most important aspects in the cybersecurity world today, which is compliance. And over the next 1 hour, I'll walk you through all the aspects of compliance, what compliance really is, why it matters, and how it communicates well with the organizations and with the customer trust. So whether you are in business or in the tech community or here just to know about compliance and how it secures the organization, so this session is just for you. So let's deep dive into it. As you can see, the topic for today is Modern Compliance 101, where we are going to discuss the overview of compliance, what compliance really is, and about different compliances in the cybersecurity world, and what we can do to make our companies, our organizations secure, and also we can share some non-compliance perspective what we have to face we have if we are non-compliant, and also it's all the perspectives around it. So now Threatsys is a leading cybersecurity company that works with enterprises, government bodies, and also businesses of all sizes. We here help identify vulnerabilities, secure digital systems, and ensure organizations meet global security and privacy standards. We have seen firsthand how fast threats evolve and how compliance, when done right, acts as both a shield and as a growth carrot driver also. So that is a perspective what I will be sharing with you today. So let's dive into what we'll be covering today. So now let's talk about what we are covering. So here is the roadmap for our session. First of all, we'll be defining compliance in simple terms and look at why it is so critical for every organization. Then we will see how compliance has evolved over time and what happens when companies ignore it. So we will also look at some real world cases of non-compliance, and most importantly, we will try to break down some of the major security standards and regulations like ISO, SOC 2, GDPR, HIPAA, DPDP, and also PCI-DSS. So for all this, we will discuss about what they really mean, what these compliances and all the standards and regulations that I talked about, what they really mean, who they apply to, and why they really matter. So by the end, you will be knowing how to turn compliance into an advantage and not a headache for your organization and all. And of course, we'll keep this session interactive. So if you are watching this live or even later on YouTube, just feel free to drop questions in the comment section. So as I'm beginning the session, just let me slow things down just a bit here, because this right here is the core of everything that we'll be talking about today. So the slide says what is compliance, but let's go a bit deeper, because in the cybersecurity world, this one word has many layers like an onion. So simply saying compliance is just doing businesses in a way that is legal, ethical, and secure. Okay, but beyond avoiding penalties, this is something what makes clients, your partners, and investors trust you. It shields our businesses from costly breaches, lawsuits, and all, and helps our company or your company by passing different type of audits and expanding into new markets. So just think of compliance as a breeze between promises and proofs. Like we promise our customers that we keep their data safe, and we promise our investors like we are following all the best practices. On the other hand, we are also promising regulators that we are obeying the law and all. So compliance is this process where we are proving that all that is true. We are promising our customers, investors, and regulators, and by compliance, we are proving that what we are promising is all true. So when we'll talk about compliance, we're really thinking about making sure a company runs responsibly, right? So we follow laws, regulations, standards, and different frameworks that apply to it. So as I'm talking about these laws, regulations, standards, and frameworks, let's first understand what these words really mean. Okay, so think of regulations are like just legal requirements, like we can say GDPR in Europe or India's DPTP Act. They are all regulations which every company must follow by the law, right? So next, let's talk about standards. So standards are structured set of requirements, we can say, or we can say these are recognized best practices like ISO 27001, PCI DSS. These are the standards. Also, we generally say this as compliances, like ISO compliances, PCI DSS compliance. So these are the standards. And coming to frameworks, you can say there are different frameworks like NIST CSF. So overall saying, we can say that by following the frameworks, certain frameworks, we're building controls for our organization to meet some standards like we can say ISO or SOC 2 or PCI DSS. And also we are making sure that we are not violating any regulations like DPDP or GDP, right? So compliance is not just a checkbox, it's how you show the world that your business is ethical, legal, and also secure. Now let's move into the next part. Why this compliance thing really matters? It matters because it does four key things, which are first of all it protects our business from fines, different type of lawsuits, and costly data breaches, right? And second, it builds trust, like with our clients, partners, our regulators, our customers. It helps building trust. And thirdly, it strengthens our reputation as it is very vital in today's risk-prone world. And finally, it also enables growth because when we are compliant, everything like audits, partnership, and global expansion, all these things becomes just easier. So whether you are in tech, healthcare, finance, or retail, compliance touches everyone and every field. So talking about the evolution, compliance hasn't always looked like this. So back in the 1980s and 1990s, compliance mostly meant like financial paperwork, tax billings, and basic legal checks to make sure that a company was like paying taxes and following local business laws. And by the early 2000s, with the rise of the internet and global trade, we saw standards like ISO 27001 emerged to address information security, and governments began tightening rules around this and corporate accountabilities. So now, fast forwarding to 2010s and beyond, what happened is the explosion of digital data and cyber attacks turned compliance into a critical business function. Right. So regulation, different compliance regulations like GDPR, which was introduced in back in 2018 in Europe, and also HIPAA updates came in 2008 and 9 onwards in the US, and now which recently India adopted as DPDP Act, right, back in 2023. So these are not just like legal hurdles; they are here because of customer trust and data security, as they have become as important as profit itself for business and also for companies. So organizations that embrace this shift and are treating compliance as a strategic priority, they tend to thrive, while those that ignore it are risking just fines or you can say reputational damage and even survivals. So coming to the non-compliances related consequences, first is financial penalties. So regulators across around the globe, whether it's European Union with like GDPR or India under the DPDP Act, all are imposing high penalties that can reach like millions of dollars, right? And the second one, we have legal action. So beyond fines, businesses like there's a different type of lawsuits from customers, partners, or even like the shareholders, right? So these cases that can drag on for like years and also cost far more than any upfront investment and compliance. So third is of course reputational damage. So once news of a breach or violations like spreads, customers trust takes a nosedive. And believe me, rebuilding credibility can take years, and some companies never really recover. And next is operational disruption. So all these like investigations, audits, and mandatory fixes often force teams to like divert their focus from growth to like firefighting, slowing the business down significantly. Right? So at last we have a loss of business opportunities. So as many enterprise clients, investors, and government contracts now require strict compliance certifications as a prerequisite. If you are not compliant, you might not just even consider, right? So, as a whole, what's the takeaway from all this that we have discussed? So, as of what we discussed, we saw that well, compliance has a cost, but it also the cost of ignoring this compliance thing is far more greater, right? So, not just financially, but also we are getting in loss, like we are losing customer trust, growth, and also in long term stability. We are in a back position. So let's see what happens due to these consequences and some real world cases. So now, as we just discussed about the consequences of non-compliance, let's see what are the some real world cases. So here are the some examples which you can see on the screen. As you can see, the Marriott was fined $23 million under GDPR for just data mishandling, right? And British Airways like that suffered a $26 million penalty after data breach. And the Heartland payment systems here, as you can see, exposed over 100 million credit card details. So the reputational hit alone took years to recover from. These are not just any like rare cases; they are reminders of why we can't treat compliance as optional, right? And other than these, if you have to take another case, we can also so that must be like Meta, right? So just recently in 2023, as all of you may know, the European Union fined Meta $1.2 billion or euros, 1.2 billion euros for violating GDPR rules, right, related to data as it was transferring data to the US or something like that. And for your information, this fine is the largest ever imposed under the European Union's GDPR, right? Now let's move on to the next slide. So as there are several different type of companies offering different type of services, that is why all these different industries face different type of compliances, right? So here are the five big ones or standards or compliances which we are seeing in day-to-day life. We will hear about most. So first is ISO standards like ISO 27001, which focuses on quality and information security. Then comes SOC 2. It's like just proving how you are safeguarding customer data. Then comes GDPR and DPDP regulations, which are covering personal data privacy for Europe and India respectively. So GDPR is active in Europe and DPDP is our India's regulation, right? And similarly, HIPAA is also a regulation which is into healthcare industry. And last comes the PCI standard. So for anyone who is handling payment card data, so they need PCI DSS compliant. And across all these, the process is almost similar. Like organizations have to go through this phase. So we can say the phases, the first phase can be gap assessment. So in this phase, you identify where your current practices fall short. Right? Then comes evidence collection, where documenting controls, logs, and all the processes happen. And after that, audit and assessment happens by a qualified auditor or assessor, depending on the standard. And finally comes the certification attestation phase, which happens and it just proves that proves compliance. It just proves compliance to our clients or partners or regulators. So now we will now dive into each of the standards and regulations in detail, so you can understand not just what they really mean, but how they really apply to your sectors, right? So ISO compliance is about like aligning your organization's processes with internationally recognized standards for quality, safety, and especially information security. So think of ISO 27001, which is for cyber security, or ISO 9001, which is for quality management. All these are voluntary standards, okay, but they are widely respected worldwide, especially if you work with like global clients or want to build credibility in new markets. So the key objectives of ISO certification are to improve your operations, reduce risk, and give your customers confidence that your practices are consistent and reliable. And it's also applicable across industries, IT, manufacturing, services, pretty much everything. So any sector where quality and security matters, ISO compliance is there. And the benefit is also clear that it builds international trust, and also you can say it ensures that you are like following best practices. Now, ISO has its challenges also. It's not a one-time effort. ISO requires extensive documentations, audits, and standardized processes. It can feel heavy at first, but once in place, it actually streamlines operations and opens doors to more business opportunities globally. Right? So let's take an overview on SOC 2 compliance as well. So SOC stands for System and Organization Controls. It's a framework developed by American Institute of Certified Public Accounts, or we can say AICP, to help service organizations demonstrate that the design and operating effectiveness of their internal controls, and it also shows how a company manages and protects customer data. So it's built around 5 trust principles, including security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. There are two main types of the SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, SOC 2 compliance, which are SOC 2 Type 1 and SOC 2 Type 2. So in the SOC 2 Type 1, it checks your controls at a single point of time, like do you have the right systems and policies in place at a particular point of time. And in the SOC 2 Type 2, it just goes a bit deeper, like testing those controls over a period like of 6 to 12 months to see if they actually work in practice. So we can overall say that Type 1 is just like a snapshot at a particular frame of time, and SOC 2 Type 2 is like just a video recording, right, over a certain period of time. So that's the basic difference between them. And the objective of SOC 2 compliance is also very simple, that you as a organization or as a company, you have to prove to your clients and partners that you just handle their data securely and reliably. So while SOC 2 started as a US focused framework, but now it is widely used across the globe, especially in IT and B2B services. So it's particularly important for SaaS companies, cloud providers, and any business handling third party or customer data. And for many enterprises or partnerships, SOC 2 isn't just optional, but it's just a ticket to even be considered. Now let's take a look at HIPAA. So as of now, as we have discussed SOC 2 and ISO, all of those are standards as we discussed earlier. Now HIPAA comes as a regulation, right? So HIPAA is a US federal law that regulates how organizations use and share an individual's protected health information. What we say is PHI, protected health information, and it applies to healthcare providers, insurers, and even health tech companies that process patient data. And the goal of HIPAA is also very simple, and it is to safeguard health data privacy, which ensures confidentiality and give patients rights over their medical information. So while it's a primary US law, it affects any company that touches American healthcare data, even those based outside of the US, right? So let's take a look at DPDPR. Yes, and now here comes the DPDPR, or we can say Digital Personal Data Protection Act, which was imposed back in 2023, which is India's law for protecting personal data. It governs how organizations collect, store, and use individuals' digital information, ensuring transparency and also accountability. And the key objectives of DPDP regulation are to make sure that the data is processed lawfully, empowering individuals with rights over their personal information, and also it hold organizations accountable for like protecting their data. And it also like applies across industries like from tech and fintech to healthcare, e-commerce, and even government services, right? And most importantly, it applies to any organization processing data of individuals in India. There is some challenges in this operational side also for the DPTP regulation, like setting up proper consent mechanisms, honoring user rights, and ensuring cross-border data transfers for the law, right? But in the long run, if we can say, it's designed to make companies more trustworthy and globally competitive. Now, let's move to GDPR. Just like DPTP, what we discussed, GDPR is just like that. It's a regulation from European Union. GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation, and it's the privacy law of European Union that governs how organizations collect, store, and process personal data. It's been in effect since 2018 and is widely seen as the global benchmark for data protection. So the main objectives of GDPR are to protect individual privacy, make data usage transparent, and finally to give users strong rights like the right to access, correct, or even they can delete their personal data. So it's mandatory for any organization handling European Union residents data, even if the company is based outside of the Europe. This means an Indian company serving in European customers also need to comply with GDPR. Right. So for businesses, GDPR helps avoid massive fines, as we have seen and discussed about Meta, and it also improves data governance and builds user trust, which is increasingly competitive advantage. Right. Now let's talk about PCI DSS. So unlike the last three slides where I was explaining different regulations, the PCI DSS is a standard, right? So this is the last standard, and we'll be discussing today PCI DSS, or and PCI DSS stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, which is a global security framework designed to protect cardholder data, right? So it applies to any business that stores, processes, or transmits payment card information. So whether you are a retailer, a bank, an e-commerce platform, fintech company, a SaaS provider, even as a payment processor. So why does this PCI DSS even exist? It exists because as payment fraud and breaches can cost millions, not just in fines, but you can also lose trust and relationships with banks and card networks. So PCI DSS sets clear rules to reduce those risks, right? And the key requirements for the PCI DSS certification include securing network and systems, encrypting sensitive data, enforcing strict access controls, monitoring and testing networks, and also like maintaining policies for information security. Now, one thing many doesn't realize that PCI DSS is not like one size fits all. The requirements are based on merchant levels, which are tied to like your annual card transaction volume. Like there are four levels of merchant level in PCI. So if you are making more less than 20,000 transactions, you can go for level 4 merchant, right? And like that, if you are crossing over 6 million transactions annually, these organizations must undergo annual on-site audits by a QSA, or what you know as a qualified security accessor, plus quarterly network scans. Now, to wrap up, till now we have seen how different compliances has evolved from simple paperwork to a core business function that protects people, profits, and also reputation. So, in this discussion, we worked through the major standards like ISO, SOC 2, and PCI-DSS, and also regulations like GDPR, DPDP, and HIPAA, and how each of these helps organizations build trust and reduce risk. We also touched on the consequences of like ignoring these compliance things, like from fines to lawsuits to reputational loss and lost opportunities. And what is the key takeaway from this session? We can say that compliance is not just about like avoiding penalties, it's about earning trust, unlocking partnerships, and making your business future ready, right? So if there is one message I want to, and I want you to leave with, it's this: like, make compliance a daily habit, right? Not a yearly headache. The companies that do this don't just survive, but they lead and grow in today's era. So thank you all for your time and attention today. I hope this session gave you a clearer picture of how different compliance standards, frameworks, and all the regulations work, and like what steps organizations actually take to meet them, right? So I would love to hear your thoughts or questions. So whether it's about any of the standards we discussed, like ISO, SOC 2, GDPR, DPDP, HIPAA, or PCIDSS, or anything about how to approach compliance in your organizations, just feel free to ask. Thank you, everyone. So as we can see, we're having a question from Pragyansu. And how does VAPT align with PCI DSS compliant requirements? Uh, that's a good question, and it comes up quite a lot during audits. So here is the thing: like PCI DSS is not just about like locking things down with firewalls and passwords. It's just proving that your environment is secure and always stay secure. So that's where VAPT, like vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, this comes in, right? So VAPT is directly tied to PCI DSS requirement. There are all the requirements lists for PCI DSS. So it's tied to like PCI DSS requirement number 11. It's mandatory to perform like regular vulnerability scans and annual penetration testing to identify and fix real world security gaps in your like application, right? So this helps to proving that all our systems are secure and also compliant, and not just in theory but also in practice. So I think that is for Pragyan. So let's see if you are having any other questions. And as we can see, Mama asked a question like, can HIPAA help in India's healthcare? So I can say it doesn't directly apply in India, but yes, it can still help. Like uh, as we discussed, HIPAA sets a solid framework for protecting patient data, like how to handle sensitive records, like control access and ensure privacy. So Indian healthcare providers, especially those who were just like handling international patients or like working with US based companies, often follow HIPAA for best practices, right? To by this they can just boost trust or like improve data handling and stay globally competitive. So while not legally required in India, HIPAA can guide good data protection until something like India's DPDP Act fully kicks in healthcare industry as well. So here we have got another question from Kanha asking how GDPR makes sense in India as because it's in Europe, right? So explain. Yeah, yes. As I explained, GDPR is like as per European Union law. Yes, but it still matters in India. If you will say or ask why, because it has a thing called extra territorial scope in the GDPR, right? So that means if an Indian company also handles data of European citizens, as I described in the PPT as well, maybe through a website or app or any type of service, so they must be comply with GDPR. We can't just get any exceptions in that. Three questions. So, Glenn, we're having a question from Glenn asking some latest complaints you can name. So, as we discussed in session, uh, these are the latest and most relevant complaints, right? So, like ISO 27001 2022 version and SOC 2 Type 1 and Type 2. India's, we can say, regulations like DPDP Act, which was just recently launched back in 2023, HIPAA for healthcare, and also PCI DSS 4.0.1 version, which is the latest version uh, recently released, right? So these are some latest standards and regulations. So we're having another question from Aris asking what compliance requirements must an organization meet when dealing with both health and non-health insurance, right? So I can say when you are dealing with both health and non-health like insurances, it needs to segregate data and processes and different type of controls clearly, right? So for the health side, HIPAA or similar data protection principles must be followed, and similarly, if you are having like different type of insurances, then we have to separate different policies, dedicated teams or access roles in the organizations, and a unified governance model we have to implement that respects both these domains, right? So without mixing like sensitive health data with another lines of businesses, we can separate both of them. And strict we can also implement strict privacy access controls or audit rules for patient data also. I hope that answers Aris. कौन को विचार होगा as I can see there are no more questions right now, so I think we should end the session. So thank you all for joining. I hope this session gave you some clarity and value around security complaints. So I appreciate you all for taking your time, which really means a lot for me. So even if you are asking or having any questions right after it, uh, the session ends, just feel free to drop them in the comments. Thank you, everyone.